Welcome to the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up for the week of 11 October 2020. Naughty cameras being sold on Discord, Zoom end-to-end, patching, Trickbot, BleedingTooth, gamer scams, and where do you hide your cash when you're wearing a toga? All this and more on Security Weekly News Wrap-Up.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
It's the show that keeps you up to date on the latest security news twice a week, your trusted source for accurate security information and expert analysis. It's time for Security Weekly News. Do you know where your organization's crown jewel data is, whose data it is, what it contains, and if it's flagged, tagged, and classified accurately? Defense in Depth requires discovery in depth. At Big ID, they help organizations uncover dark data, classify sensitive and regulated data, meet compliance requirements, and take action for data on-prem, in the cloud, and everywhere in between. Learn more about how Discovery in Depth can change the way enterprise organizations find, classify, and protect sensitive data at securityweekly.com/Big ID. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Hola, it is Friday, and I'm Doug White from Roger Williams University. Welcome to the Security Weekly News Wrap-Up Show. Let's wrap up all the show topics for the week. On Application Security Weekly number 125, Mike, Matt, and John had their guest as James Manico, the CEO of Manicode Security. James wanted to talk about managing passwords and the changes suggested in the NIST 863B Digital Identity Guideline on Authentication and Lifecycle Management regarding password policy. So obviously that's something that everybody talks about a lot. NIST has changed their password policy in this special report, so definitely something you may want to check out and see what's going on. On Business Security Weekly number 191, Paul, Jason, and Matt talked with Mike Lloyd, the CTO of Red Seal. The topic was about how typical security teams are managing 20 to 50 technologies with enough staff to have expertise in about 3. So how do you choose defensive technologies that are truly essential? That is such a difficult thing, especially today. I came out of an era when you didn't have any defensive technology except yourself. Today, when I look at defensive technology, it is almost overwhelming with the number of choices you have. And so a lot of companies go out and buy a bunch of these things hoping that's going to be the next big thing, and you end up like that bag full of golf clubs for the people that have all the different golf clubs. Like I went and played golf once. I'm really terrible at it, but I went and played, and this guy that was playing with me had he had an illegal number of clubs apparently. And, I was like, how do you even pick? So same thing there. In the second segment, Michael Santacangelo returns. Michael's a former host, or maybe still a host, but he isn't around as much. And he was on to talk about the 4 C's of leadership: culture, collaboration, communication, and cultivation. So when you think of C words, that's not the one that usually comes to mind, but there's 4 that you might want to check out. On Enterprise Security Weekly number 202, John, Matt, and Paul had Whitney Maxwell, a security consultant with Rapid7. Whitney was on to talk about phishing and vishing and how to protect your users. So always a very relevant topic because your users are constantly being targeted with this stuff. I don't even know how many times a week I get notifications from different places that I work about current scams that are going on in those places, and I'm sure you get the same thing, and you're probably writing these notices, and I'm getting these notices from the people that write them at the places I work telling me about all the things that are going on, and it's just astounding how much, but it works, right? That's why they keep doing it. On the last segment of that show, a micro interview with Liam Downward, the CEO of Charisma, and Matthew Gardner, the principal and security strategist for Mimecast. This is one of those micro interviews. where they have two people from two different companies talking. Liam was talking about simplifying the process of identifying, assessing, and mitigating risks. And Matthew was on to talk about summarizing the Black Hat Threat Intelligence Report. Yeah, that one. That's a big report. It's definitely well worth checking those out. On Security Weekly News number 73, Jason Wood talked about how Office 365 is a continuing favorite for cyber attacks and how those attacks develop, something that is certainly current. On Security and Compliance Weekly number 47, Jeff, John, Josh, and Scott had Mike Brooks. Excuse me. It says Mike. I wrote Mike, and I said Matt. I know somebody named Matt Brooks. Mike Brooks, the CISO at Abacode, who was on to talk about the transition from cybersecurity roles in the DoD to cybersecurity roles in the private sector. So for a lot of military government people, moving out of those military government roles into private sector is a real change of pace, not to mention change of acronym dictionary. There was, of course, discussion about Mike's views on compliance. For a second segment, Mike sticks around to provide an update with the crew on the Cybersecurity Maturity Model certification, which is called the CMMC. And I'm going to go watch that because I don't know what that certification is. So if you are interested in such things, it's probably worth checking out. On Paul Security Weekly number 670 last night, the first segment had Roy Cohen, the co-founder and VP of Sales at Vicarious, along with Shana Reiner, a C++ developer at Vicarious. They were on to discuss software vulnerabilities growing quickly and security teams trying to keep up. And they were primarily talking about how do you prioritize threats and what tools can you use and how do their tools help you identify the more severe risks. And they had a really fun Kahoot game on. So I was on there playing too. I did get some of the answers right, but I got timed out on one, which really bugged me because the timer on the screen was, hey guys, the timer on the screen was different than the timer in my game where I was logged in. So I thought I had 15 seconds left and I was still thinking about my answer. And then it said, sorry, time's up. And I lost. So, I didn't win whatever they were giving. I think they were giving away a Tesla X or something. So, I don't know. And the second segment, Patrick Garrity, the VP of Operations at Blumira, joined the crew to talk about how security services and tools need to be more democratic, meaning more available to everyone, and that they need to allow plug and play for anyone with IT skills without requiring a lot of security expertise. This is a complicated problem. A lot of companies cannot afford both the tools and the expertise. And I have consulted with a lot of companies who had bought tools that were sometimes quite expensive and then realized once they got the tools that the tweaking, management, and operation of those tools was, despite what the marketing materials said, not as simple as the marketing material said, has AI will solve all your problems for you automatically. And then, of course, that doesn't really work. And of course, they had an epic news segment. Even if I wasn't on it, it was, it was depressing for me not to be there, but it was a great news segment regardless. So definitely, if you have not watched that, you might want to check it out. My favorite threat of the week is going to have to be home security cameras. The reason Lee put this story up on the show last night, it was Lee's story number 9, I think, on his list of news stories, and it will definitely make you think about issues with those open cams. Apparently, a hacking group is selling access to home security camera footage on the Discord platform, and they claim that they have taken this for more than 50,000 home security cameras, which doesn't surprise me. And they claim that they have video and footage of children in various stages of undress for $150. I'm sorry, people. I don't understand why people want to, they want to look at nude children. I don't get it. I know it goes on, but I don't get it. But apparently there's a lot of people who want that sort of thing. To me, this is sort of really back in that IoT realm that I've talked about before, because IoT devices are being sold at a record pace, and new devices like that Ring drone cam, if you haven't seen it, it's really cool. It can lift off and fly around your home with a camera when you're not there. If you want to just say, oh, wow, did we leave the stove on? You can fly the drone in there to see that the stove is on. The drone is not capable of turning the stove off, of course. But all these things keep getting added to our premises and our lives. And, of course, with COVID, this affects your enterprise network as well, because if there's compromises in these IoT networks in your home, there's compromises that are potentially coming across your VPNs into your own networks. I know you have that blocked, but not everybody does. Now, if you look on Amazon, there's about 100 different brands of cameras. A lot of them are probably the same base chassis that's being sold. If you've ever been to China and you go into like the distribution districts and driven around, which is really cool if you ever get a chance to do that, and watch, there's just storefront after storefront selling motherboards or selling chips or selling cameras or whatever, and you buy a truckload of these things and slap your own branding on them, and they're really just the same thing underneath. It's really to tell if these are secure, and we all know that. It's hard to tell sometimes if they're web accessible. The other problem, though, like a lot of these segments that we were talking about before, is you need to have a security engineer on your premises just to assess the threat surface of every new device you add to your property, right? So you bring in a bunch of security cameras and you stick them on the property. Somebody really needs to assess that, and most people aren't quite capable of setting their PIN numbers. So, now they're supposed to evaluate the threat of this device. Most of your family probably has a lot of trouble programming the thermostat and calls you all the time saying, hey, I'm just going to assume you know everything. Sorry, family. But they let alone, the potential IoT threat surface of this stuff is immense. And so when you put the security camera on the property, you've basically added an unregulated, unevaluated, uncontrolled, and every single one of them has a default setup. They all have credentials that are default, probably. They may have hard-coded credentials. We've seen that. They may have backdoors built in to allow remote access that were either intentionally put there for nefarious purposes, put there for engineering purposes. I mean, those backdoor Trojans used to be called a maintenance hook, if you've ever heard that term from the dark old days. A maintenance hook was something that people built into mainframes when they set it up so that when the user screwed it up later, they could come back and get in. Today, it's called a backdoor Trojan. Now add the cloud to it. Almost all these cameras store data to the cloud so that they don't have to tell the customer, oh, yeah, and you're going to need a NAS with about, a petabyte of storage space on your premises to keep all this stuff. So the camera's boosting everything up onto the cloud. Most people don't have NASs, so there's a device connected to the cloud. Guess what? It has to have a login and password combo to connect to this who knows what cloud. So the local device may be doing this automatically. It may ask you to set this up in the processor. It may just use the defaults. It creates a socket. It uploads. It may stream live. Who knows what's on this cloud or who's controlling it? Most users just want to get the thing set up and running as quick as possible. That's what the marketing people and the sales people want. So the setup is super simple. Plug it in and it works. Connect it to your network by setting this to the, and the next thing you know, you've got an unregulated, uncontrolled, unmonitored device in your network that's connected to the cloud with default credentials. So it would be pretty easy to buy a lot of cams and resell them with the intent to spy. I mean, you could certainly go buy a bunch of these things and sell them cheaper than everybody else on Amazon. And guess what? You probably sell a lot of them. Now add a compromise on the cloud side. So somebody that could get into the cloud or access the cloud either with credential stuffing, some other kind of attack, or maybe they just control the cloud. And, voila, all of a sudden you got access to a lot of cam feeds. So control your cams. Advise your family to control their cams and try and help your users understand the threat that these things pose, because not only is it just a threat to your local network, it's a threat to their personal privacy. If people can flip these cameras on, throw a blanket over but then it's not very good as a security cam, right? If you toss a towel over it every time you leave. And now all the top news. All right. I led with this story from Pulse Security Weekly last night. A lot of these came from there. This story is titled, "There is a Schism in Cybersecurity." And I didn't much like the title. Sorry, writers. I was not a fan of the way you cached this. It sounds like, to me, I know that you used the word correctly ultimately, but the schism in cybersecurity sounds like we're all fighting about something, but that's not the point of the story. It is a cool story to read. And I'm not going to go through the whole story here, but one of their 5 points they make about how we see the world differently is that employers keep saying there is a skills gap. Is that real? And their point is the schism is between cybersecurity and the regular, like the rest of the enterprise, which is true. It's just I don't like the headline very much. And But I really do like this point that the enterprise side, the management side, keeps saying there's a skills gap. And this is a common excuse. We saw this excuse before in IT. You could build a cyber organization. You and I both know this. We could do it if we wanted to. And the people are there. The problem is they don't want to, and this is a convenient excuse. Oh, we can never get people. Cyber is a service, and that means that it doesn't generate any revenue. It's a sink instead of a source. You want cyber people, well, you have to pay for them, and you have to support the organization. You can't just hire somebody and pay them. I've seen this a dozen times. Then they quit because they don't get any training, they don't get any support, they don't get any money to travel to DEF CON, hint, hint, and then they leave. And I mean, I've seen this over and over. I've consulted with people on this over and over where they said, we don't understand. We keep hiring people, we pay them, and then they take off. And I go in and I say, interview me, tell me the offer, and then let's look at your perks and benefits. And I go look at it and I go, why would anybody work here? It's a dump. I wouldn't work here for 15 minutes. In fact, I quit. Send my check. But anyway, I could go on about this one. I could have made this a weekly rant and talked about it for the whole show. But they do make 5 very good points. A lot of these are the same points that were made about IT when it first got started, and companies treated IT the very same way. They said it's too expensive, we can't do it, there's no people, we can't hire anybody. And it's because, I've literally had companies call me and say, we can't hire, we're trying to pay $14 an hour. And I'm like, and what are you trying to hire? And they're like, oh, well, we want them to be a CISSP, a CCNP, and have at least a master's degree. I really had somebody tell me this once. And I said, and you're going to pay what? And he was like, we could go as high as $20 an hour. And I was like, I think Wendy's is paying 19. And he's like, what? Well, he was like, yeah, but these are just technicians. And I was talking to this guy who was a CEO who probably was knocking down $10 million a year, but he can't afford to pay those IT people. Yeah, right. But my favorite point was that the CISO should report to the CEO, not the CIO. This is one of my big hang-ups, pet peeves. I personally believe the CISO should report to the board directly, but good luck with that. But I did think the title of the article was misleading, and there really is no schism amongst us. The schism is between us and the rest of the industry. So, that's going on. It is a schism, I grant you, but it's not quite what the title promised. I thought we were getting ready to have the new cyber beta people are going to split off and form their own set of cyber compliance rules. Zoom promised end-to-end encryption a while ago, and then again they promised this week. And they finally did announce that phase 1 of 4, starting next week, will solicit feedback about the process. Users will need to enable the end-to-end encryption in Zoom, and Zoom did promise this earlier, but they turned out they were using TLS, and so, of course, that only encrypted the packet until it hit their server, at which point it was unencrypted. So supposedly this time the packets are going to be completely encrypted all the way through, end-to-end. We'll see next week, but be sure and check that out when it comes out. Ardit Farizi, who goes by the name The Directory, is a hacker from a Kosovan group called KHS that worked with ISIS and handed over the data for 1,351 U.S. government and military personnel to the terrorist organization. Yes, that ISIS. There was a time when there was quite a few organizations called ISIS. I actually belonged to one. I was like, and then all that happened, and I was like, well, I'm going to cancel my membership because I don't really want people going, do you belong to ISIS? And people even named their kids ISIS. I knew somebody had a kid, and I knew somebody had a pet named ISIS. And, Egypt, the god that brought Osiris back from the dead and wore that big hat with the sun on it, she was like, that cool god or goddess. I don't know if that's appropriate, but she had a son, and yeah. Thanks, ISIS. You ruined it all. So confusing. Now I'm talking about that ISIS. Anyway, Farizi, who's the first person convicted in the United States for cyber terrorism, was sentenced to 20 years. And he was arrested in 2015 and in Malaysia, and then he was extradited in 2016 to the United States. So he actually is now been sentenced. He pled. So I think, once you're up on I supported ISIS charges, and I guess KHS was sort of advertising the people on their sites and maybe, that kind of stuff and bragging. So this was one of those hacker brag things. And yeah, and of course, somebody was watching and they went and got you. So I was in a meeting yesterday and this came up, but it was a story on PSW last night as well, and I covered it on Tuesday. Attackers are now using the NetLogon / ZeroLogon vulnerability, which we've talked about over and over, CVE 2020-1472, in conjunction with other compromises to VPNs or other approaches. So now they're using Fortinet, they were using Mobile Iron, they were using other VPN compromises to get into the networks. So people were saying, we don't have any outward-facing servers, so this isn't a threat. And, well, guess what? They came in through VPNs. So they either credential-stuffed VPNs or they used other exploits. I listed some of those exploits on Tuesday on the news show. They were talking about this on Security Weekly last night. But they're getting in, and then they inject the ZeroLogon attack and are able to take over the domain controller. So they are specifically, what I was hearing in a meeting yesterday, and I'm not sure I'm supposed to talk about the meeting, but I'm talking about it anyway. And it is in the news story, so it's not like some secret thing. But specifically targeting the U.S., federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial, which pretty much includes everything, right? I mean, once you get down to like tribal and territorial, you pretty much included everybody and anybody. There was a joint statement from CISA and the FBI that said while election sites may have been targeted, that did not seem to be the primary target in these attacks on networks. And it was basically just an all-out hit on government networks and state networks and so on. That's pretty typical in a major flaw, since people don't patch their systems as rapidly as a disclosure, and hacks of the flaw occur. So please patch your networks, folks. I will say we need to put more focus on state, local, tribal, and territorial networks. They don't have much budget, and they can't afford consultants. Believe me, they try. They're always calling saying, I bet you'd like to do this for free. And I'm like, not really, no. So get involved in your region and try to make them move in the right direction to support this stuff. I do know that Congressman Jim Langevin of Rhode Island told me he's backing some new bipartisan legislation that will hopefully put some more help up for these lower level entities and try to help get them up to speed with their security programs. Congressman Langevin's been on my other shows numerous times. So thanks to him for working on that. CVE 2020-16898 is a vulnerability in ICMP v6, which allows remote code execution on Windows via RRDNS. Basically, this article says that if you disable IPv6 completely, well, it might cause Windows to do some bad things because they are using that in Active Directory now and even in local networks. But the vulnerability in the router advertisement system may lead to a remote code execution, and it can also lead to a blue screen of death. Apparently, it's pretty difficult to do this for remote code execution, but, blue screen of death. And there is a patch, so seriously. You can turn off RRDNS, so that's round-robin DNS, which is a load balancing feature, if you aren't familiar with it, for IPv6 DNS that allows you to manage traffic better, so just like the load balancing stuff on IPv4 DNS. But it's probably easier just to patch up, but at the very least, disable the RRDNS, but really, patch. U.S. Cyber Command warned about this as well and said to patch it immediately. Google released a high-severity flaw in the BleedingTooth stack in any Linux kernel below 5.9 that supports BlueZ. So this is CVE 2020-12-351 in BlueZ, which is built into those kernels. So those earlier kernels did have this built into the kernel as a service. The attack is named BleedingTooth, which, that's awful. A bleeding tooth? That just sounds horrific. I don't know. Most things I'm not squeamish about. I used to watch, autopsies and stuff, but bleeding teeth, yeah. And BlueZ, which is another one, and it has there's other vulnerabilities in this as well for low-energy spoofing attacks, and there's a whole pile of those kind of things. But this new one is a zero-click remote code execution, and there's a video in this article I linked showing Ubuntu, and they used one Ubuntu laptop to open the calculator on another Ubuntu laptop without touching the laptop. So, hands-free. Well, not really. It's hands on one system, but not the other. The attack would, of course, require you to be close to the device within Bluetooth range. But, Bluetooth, Windows, somebody in the parking lot with a Bluetooth amplifier beats me. But it's still, any kind of RCE like this is serious. There are kernel upgrades, and there are Intel kernel fixes linked on the article. But again, patching Linux up, because a lot of these are production servers. Hopefully you don't have Bluetooth enabled on your production servers unless you really, really need it. But, people do, or they don't even know it's there and it got added. So, please take that. We found out this week that 2 parties attacked Trickbot from the story last week. One was Cyber Command, and the other was Microsoft, and a partnership of various other people. Microsoft got legal approval to shut this down and went after Trickbot resources using trademark violation law. Although, going after Trickbot in court, I always think about those to a judge, and they're going, and you're like, what do we need to use here to go after these guys? They're criminals. But they claimed that Trickbot irreparably harmed them by damaging their reputation, their brand, and their customer goodwill. They filed a complaint on October 6th and then proceeded to seize all the servers and other resources. In the earlier story, I reported that a config was pushed out to Trickbot that pointed to Trickbots to 127.0.0.1. So that was probably Cyber Command. But Microsoft was seizing servers and resources and IP addresses and all kinds of things that were being identified as part of Trickbot. No one, including Microsoft or probably Cyber Command, thinks this will be the end of Trickbot, but it definitely put a dent in their operation, which is widely used for spreading malware and ransomware. FIFA 21 is the latest release in a popular gaming series for soccer fans, and these annual releases are always eagerly awaited. Any of these other popular sports series usually have an annual release, and when the annual release happens, they drop the new game with all the year's players and teams and everything, and the first drop is a wild day. I've seen this where there's a baseball game, but people all want to play the game on opening day. They have new players, new uniforms, all this kind of stuff. But scammers were really heavily targeting FIFA 21, which holds the Guinness World Record as the top-selling sports video game with 280 million copies sold around the world. Apparently, this game has a mode called Ultimate Team. I've never played this game or even seen it, but they use coins in the game. So these are in-game tokens that they buy cards and trade cards and all this kind of stuff. You've seen this before. Basically, it's a pretty obvious kind of scam then. The baseball game is called The Show. They have something called stubs. They have a lot of policies about how you can do these things. But what happens is offline, people start exchanging IRL currency, and that allows people to buy points off of me or the things that I'm selling in the game. I can sell people for real money offline. Of course, when real money gets involved, there are scams involved. Some of them are promises to create special prizes or gifts that you can get in game, and they get you to give up personal information. That was one of the scams. They may get you to include enough information to get you into the game accounts themselves and or your bank account, and or just con you out of money by saying, I will sell you the Sword of Plenty for only $500, and you buy the Sword of Plenty on eBay, and then you log into the game and the guy goes, ha ha, you just got taken. This isn't a flaw in the game, mind you. It was just hype outside the virtual stadium. And note, please, there are currently pickpockets outside the Colosseum in Rome. There were probably pickpockets outside the Colosseum in ancient Rome. And, that's been going on for a while. But I don't know, did togas have pockets? I'm not sure about that. Pick togas? Where did Romans carry their cash? I don't know. And finally, so in relation to that, Chico Rodriguez, he is the Brazilian President Bolsonaro's deputy leader in the Senate, and he was reportedly caught with a large amount of cash, and it was described in different ways in the article. I'm going to say it was stuffed down his knickers during a police raid on his home. The magazine that broke the story said that apparently he was attempting to keister the rolls of banknotes. They didn't put it quite that way, but he was attempting to hide the rolls of banknotes, where the sun don't shine, while the raid took place. And this magazine, which was called Revista Crusoe, I don't know how to pronounce that in Portuguese, but they said that many of the notes were stained. I don't know how much access they had to these notes, but anyway, the story is so filled with puns like this will go down in the annals of history. I thought all of you would probably enjoy it, you filthy animals. And that's the news wrap up for the week of 11 October 2020 in the time of plague. I'm Doug White from the always online program at Roger Williams University. See you next week on the network that never shuts down. Please vote. I don't care who you vote for, but vote, really.